So last we left the colonists, things were getting a little tense. Maybe not full-blown revolution tense, but tense nonetheless. Sure, the colonists in Britain won a war, but now the king was forcing them to stay where they're at, house soldiers, and only use gold? I don't know about you, but things are starting to get a little violation of natural rights-y for me. So, as we mentioned, wars are expensive. In fact, because the 7 Years' War, that lasted 9 years, England's debt increased from £72 million to £130 million. That's a lot of pounds! And up until 1765, the majority of the debt fell on the citizens living in England, who weren't the ones who invaded French territory, or antagonized the Indians, or even live in the colonies. Needless to say, they were getting a little put off by the fact that they had to pay more taxes, and were edging towards a rebellion themselves. That's when Prime Minister George Grenville had a scathingly brilliant idea. What if, now I know this might sound crazy, but what if we created a tax act that only affected the colonies in order to pay off some of this nasty debt? Enter the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a tax act that would require anything printed on paper, except for books, to have a royal stamp. Easy, right? Except the stamps weren't free. The colonists would have to pay for them. It is a tax act, after all. Other than paying off the war debt, Grenville hoped that this act would also shift the burden of taxes off the citizens living in England, raise revenue for paying for additional military troops that England had to send to the colonies to prevent them from wandering off and getting themselves killed by Indians, and assert a little British governmental control. After all, with all this talk about smuggling and disobeying proclamations, it was high time that England showed a little bit of dominance. Now, when I say all printed documents, I mean all printed documents. Calendars, pamphlets, contracts, diplomas, certificates, advertisements in the newspaper, liquor license, playing cards, deeds to land, newspapers, ship papers, donations, wills, and even dice. I know! Now, the stamps for the documents ranged in price from 1 penny to £10. Quick economy lesson. The types of British currency at the time were a penny, a shilling, and a pound. There are 12 pennies in a shilling and 20 shillings in a pound. And now you know. Now, things like playing cards and dice were only about 1 penny each. But advertisements and newspapers were 2 shillings and up. Liquor licenses were £1, and an attorney's license was £10. Not only were the stamps pricey, but because of the Colonial Currency Act, the colonists had to pay in gold and silver only, which they didn't have in the colonies, and the only way they could get it was through trading with England. No, not yet, John Locke! Now, if you're thinking there was no way Parliament could monitor all that paper, I'm sure this whole Stamp Act wasn't that big of a deal. Well, you'd be wrong. The king sent stamp agents to check, issue stamps, and collect taxes, and if you didn't have a stamp, you would be fined. For example, for every pack of cards sold and unstamped, you'd have to pay £10. For every page in a newspaper that didn't have a stamp, it was £20. And if you're thinking, hey, a silly stamp, that seems like it would be easy to fake, I bet the colonists made counterfeits all the time. You would be dead wrong. Like, seriously, dead wrong. If you were caught with either a document with a fake stamp or issuing a fake stamp, the penalty would be death. Yeah, death. Parliament don't mess around, yo! And if you're thinking, no problem, I'm sure if someone got caught, the juries in the colonies would side with the colonists, and they would be out with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Sorry, but you'd still be wrong. To ensure that this act was enforced, Parliament suspended all jurisdiction of colonial juries in cases of Stamp Act violations. Their sentencing would be solely decided by a British-appointed judge. Uh-oh, looks like John Locke is getting mad. Now, this act was especially significant for a variety of reasons. First, it was the first act that directly taxed just the colonies, with the intention of generating money for England. Next, because of the nature of this act, unlike the other acts, this act affected all the colonists, not just the wealthy ones or the ones sneaking in sugar. Because of that, it unintentionally had a unification effect on the colonies. They started talking about coming together to fight a common oppressive enemy and started to refer to themselves as American and less as English. They felt English was taking away their right to trial by jury, their right to grow in commercial power, and their right to free knowledge through the reading and writing. The people affected by this act the most were the people who used paper the most: the clergymen, lawyers, merchants, shipbuilders, publishers, and journalists. And those are not the kinds of people that you want to make angry. Clergymen have the power to preach and have a history of organizing and persuading people. Merchants and shipbuilders control commerce and trade. Lawyers are wealthy, intelligent, and they know the law. And publishers and journalists, well, they have the power to reach a mass of people quickly. And I don't think England could afford any bad press at this point. But the most important effect of this act was what was created as a result of it. Enter the Sons of Liberty, a secret group of colonists who met to plan, organize, and engage in protests against the Stamp Act and Parliament. Sounds pretty epic, right? The leaders of this group were charismatic speakers like Patrick Henry. They were members of the community and hard workers like Paul Revere. They were skilled and intelligent lawyers like John Adams, and they were rich like John Hancock. But the ringleader of this bunch was a prominent Boston patriot and political activist, Samuel Adams. Gosh, I wish he was really that good looking. When the act was first introduced in February 1765, the colonists were furious. This act was introduced as a direct order by the British Parliament, meaning that the colonial legislation had no say in its approval. But luckily, the act wouldn't go into effect until November of that year, so they had plenty of time to plan. Each man used his individual skills to rally the public. Paul Revere and Samuel Adams united the labor groups. John Hancock funded their meetings, and John Adams educated the masses on the legal effects of this, as well as spread the phrase, "no taxation without representation," first coined by Jonathan Mayhew in a sermon in the Boston Commons. Their goals were simple: organize the colonists, encourage merchants to limit or cease trade with England, and spread the word with protests, petitions, and general tomfoolery. And protest they did, from creating a secret network of spies called the Mechanics, to destroying British officials' homes, to tar and feathering stamp agents. England was starting to get the impression that the colonies were feeling like their rights were being abused. Okay, you can come out now, John Locke. Things started to get so bad that Benjamin Franklin, don't worry, we'll see him again soon, went to speak to the House of Commons in 1766 in England to try to convince them that the Stamp Act was a bad idea. After a lot of negotiation, the act was repealed, and there was much rejoicing. Yay! No need for a revolution now, right? We can just go on being friends with England now, right? Tea and crumpets for everyone! Wrong. The colonists were so distracted by their victory of getting the Stamp Act repealed, England was able to quietly pass a new act, the Declaratory Act. This act stated that Parliament had the authority to pass any law they wanted, and it would be binding to the American colonies. Yeah, I'm sure nothing bad's gonna come out of that.